To learn more about earning college credits with study hall courses, visit gostudyhall.com or click the link in the description. While empire isn't technically a four-letter word, it sure was treated like one in the aftermath of World War II. But just because empire was a dirty word didn't mean that 20th century nations were suddenly over their age-old lust for power. By comparing the modern actions of countries to the historical tricks laid out in Empire Building for Dummies, we can better understand the aspirations and tactics of modern superpowers. Hi, I'm Rob Fuller, and this is Study Hall, Modern World History. If you've watched literally any of the other episodes in this series, then you know that an empire is more than just these evil guys striking back. For our purposes, an empire is a large group of peoples and territories all under the supreme control of one government or ruler. Now, here's the important part. That control is pretty much always gained through force, and the people or territories are completely subordinate to their ruling body. So, not unlike Palpatine's Galactic Empire. In the aftermath of World War II and the supposed decolonization of Africa and Asia, it seemed like the sun was setting on the age of imperial glory. Or was it? Even though nobody wanted to say the E word, empire building was still on countries' minds. Like the USSR, though the Soviets didn't call themselves an empire, the USSR gained global power after World War II by an empire playbook classic. Good old-fashioned invasion. After World War II, the USSR kept its forces in the countries it had invaded, occupying places like Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and Poland that were then controlled by Russia behind the scenes. These occupied nations became satellite states of the USSR. These countries were stuck in the USSR's orbit, and the Soviets used strict political control to keep them in line. Occupied territories completely subordinate to their ruling body. But these European satellite states weren't enough for the USSR. They had their eyes on a territory that was even more desirable. Poised as a gateway between Europe and Asia, Afghanistan was a strategic country lusted after by many empires throughout history. And while the USSR had no trouble commuting to Asia themselves, they were eager to install a pro-Soviet government in the state to make sure that no one else could benefit from Afghanistan's geography. And to expand their own footprint, of course. So in 1979, the USSR sent over increasing numbers of soldiers to prop up Afghanistan's tenuous government and help stamp out an anti-communist Muslim guerrilla uprising, cementing their influence in the Middle East. But victory was easier said than done, and a decade of fighting later, the USSR had no choice but to admit defeat and withdraw their troops. They should have listened to the seminal political science documentary The Princess Bride. Never fight a land war in Asia. And the trouble wasn't over for the Soviets. All these European satellite states were demanding independence too. This culminated in the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, which was the beginning of the end for the Soviet Empire. The Soviet collection of peoples and territories under the supreme control of their governing body. By the end of 1991, the USSR, which at one point controlled 1/6 of the world's land, had dissolved. Not everyone was happy with the USSR's collapse, including one guy by the name of Vladimir Putin. Putin made it his aim to restore Russia to its previous hammer and sickle glory by creating puppet governments in the countries like Belarus and waging war to try and take over others like Ukraine, aiming to usher modern Russia into a new age of definitely not imperial glory. The USSR's quest to add more territory to their empire, their empire, was a part of a long history of colonization. But Russia's southern neighbor, China, tried another strategy to build its own power. Now, Chinese Communist Party leader Mao Zedong did his fair share of meddling in international affairs, including intervening in the Korean War. But in his quest for China's supremacy, he's best remembered for his efforts inside the country. Mao turned to complete governmental and economic control of China's diverse citizens and cultures, hoping to strengthen China's economy and unity to increase its influence, over the outside world. In 1966, he kicked off the Cultural Revolution, a socio-political revolution meant to totally reset China's culture, wiping away all history, diversity, and tradition in order to best rebuild the country according to his communist vision. Can you say complete and total imperial control? Mao mobilized China's urban youth through a group called the Red Guards, meant to challenge older traditions, policies, and politicians that stood in the way of communism. Mao also swapped out old government leaders with people who supported his communist future. But this vision was so extreme that it caused a lot of conflict among Chinese leaders and citizens. Mao's plan for complete cultural control and dominance was going off the rails, and he needed to get his country back in line fast. So he turned to every not empire's other favorite tool: the military. Mao commanded the army to take control of schools, factories, and government agencies to enforce his cultural overhaul with, well, force. Those who didn't comply were beaten, tortured, and killed, and historians estimate that millions of people died at the hands of Mao's military during the Cultural Revolution. When Mao died in 1976, his vision for a cultural revolution died with him, but not the dream of China as an empire. Wait, who said that? The Chinese government created special economic zones in places like the Shanghai Pudong New Area, which had more economic freedom than the rest of the country, and this allowed them to participate more meaningfully in the global free market, import new technology, and pump foreign currency into China's economy. And these special economic zones worked, leading to giant technological leaps that landed China on par with the other global economic superpowers of the 1990s. But while China loosened some of their economic policies, their absolute political and social control over their people continued. And by the mid-1980s, students led protests to fight for more political freedom and democratic policies. In spring 1989, 1 million unarmed protesters gathered in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, where they were gunned down by troops, crushed by tanks, and arrested by the government. China released an official death toll of 241, vastly downplaying the tragedy. Meanwhile, historians estimate that the fatalities were actually in the thousands. China was able to step into its role as a global superpower by following the imperial how-to guide of strict cultural and economic control, see subordination of the people, backed by military force. And these brutal empire-building strategies allowed them to challenge the dominance of yet another modern superpower, the United States. Following World War II, the the United States of America was in a league of its own, but they didn't have to watch our study hall series to know that holding on to that kind of power is pretty tough. Rather than expand their borders like the USSR or exert strict authoritarian control like China, the United States mostly turned to military occupation to make sure that "we're number one" chant didn't become "we're number two." Many of the US's military bases were in countries where they wanted to maintain strong influence, like Honduras, the Philippines, and the Marshall Islands. These bases weren't quite colonies, but the effect of spreading around the good old imperial influence wasn't all that different. After all, nothing convinces you to follow the US's dominance like having a bunch of soldiers right there on your doorstep. But these military bases were more than just a way to spread the US's global footprint. They also let the United States develop new military technologies to further cement their position as the #1 global superpower. Take the Marshall Islands in Micronesia. After World War II, the US took over the Marshall Islands to use them for nuclear testing. They relocated the Marshallese population to other islands so US troops could blow their homes up. For science, of course. However, in a deadly instance of procrastination, many Marshallese weren't relocated until after the tests were completed, meaning that many of these islanders not only lost their homes, but were exposed to a high dose of nuclear radiation too, giving the US the perfect opportunity to test the effects of radiation on humans, again, for science? And the United States didn't just get involved in other countries' land, but their conflicts too, often under the guise of spreading democracy when what they were really spreading was something else. imperialism. I'm talking about imperialism. For example, when the US began sending aid and later troops to the South Vietnamese during the Vietnam War in the 1950s and 60s, they said it was to protect their allies from the communist-backed North Vietnamese. The truth of it, though, is the US was desperate to expand the foothold of their influence. This is an example of interventionist politics, which is basically when a country gets wrapped up in another country's political drama for their own political gain, of course. Big empire energy, I know. And while not all of US foreign policy is blatantly interventionist, Vietnam definitely wasn't the end of the US's global military involvement. In the mid-1990s, a conservative Islamic faction known as the Taliban took control of Afghanistan with the support of a terrorist militant group called Al-Qaeda. And on September 11, 2001, a group of Al-Qaeda terrorists attacked the United States by flying hijacked planes into both the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. The US President George W. Bush responded by launching the War on Terror less than a month later. And while Bush claimed that it was about stopping the spread of Islamic extremism, it also gave the US just the excuse it needed to spread its imperial influence, freedom, spreading its freedom, all over the Middle East. The US has spent decades and billions of dollars trying to spread their empire, democracy, around the globe through their military might, and much like the empires of the 18th and 19th centuries, the US couched these imperial aspirations in racist ideas like protecting and liberating other countries like Vietnam and Afghanistan, when really, the best thing about interventionist policies to the US was the imperial power it gave. Whether they call themselves empires or not, powerful nations in the 20th and 21st centuries were following the imperial playbooks of all the empires that had come before them. And if they look like empires and act like empires, then, well, we here at Study Hall are pretty sure they're empires, even if they insist that they're not. So, let's evaluate these countries against our fancy imperial checklist. The USSR imposed its domination over multiple countries, incorporating them into the Soviet Union and expanding their borders. Check. China increased its nationalism and economic strength through the strict social and political control of their citizens. Check, check. And the United States built global influence through international military might and interventionist policies. Check. Empire building just isn't cool. It wasn't cool when the Mongols sacked Baghdad back in the 13th century, killing and enslaving nearly all of the residents. It wasn't cool when the British colonized places like India, South Africa, and the Americas, brutally exploiting their imperial subjects for their own economic profit. And it wasn't cool when Nazi Germany did, well, basically anything. And it isn't cool now as countries like Russia, China, and the United States continue to exploit their citizens and subjects across the globe to make their 21st century imperial dreams come true. The whole reason we study history is to understand the past, but also to make sense of the present. By looking at our modern-day global ecosystem through the lens of history, it makes it that much easier to call a spade a spade. An empire an empire. If you're enjoying Study Hall Modern World History and are interested in taking online courses and earning college credit, go to gostudyhall.com or click on this button to learn more. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.